We're taught to stand our ground, but for these 6 women, the need to be right overrode every warning. Arguing, refusing, and escalating turned ordinary situations deadly. Today, we're looking at 6 real cases of Karens who died in crazy ways, where attitude carried irreversible consequences. It was June 17, 2016, in a quiet residential neighborhood in Mesa, Arizona. The temperature sat near 104 degrees Fahrenheit in the late afternoon, and several homes on the block had backyard grills running ahead of sunset. Fences were low, and sound carried easily from yard to yard. Denise Harlow, 44, worked part-time as an office assistant for a small real estate firm and lived alone in a single-story home with a concrete patio and a standard propane grill. Neighbors described her as direct and argumentative during routine disputes, especially when she believed others were overreacting or interfering. That afternoon, Denise planned to grill food for 2 visiting relatives. The grill had been stored uncovered for months. When she connected the propane tank, it did not light on the first attempt. A neighbor working in his yard later said he smelled gas drifting over the fence and called out to mention it. Denise raised her voice in response, waved him off, and insisted the grill was working, continuing to adjust the tank and ignition without stopping. Over the next several minutes, Denise made repeated attempts to ignite the grill. The lid stayed closed during most of these attempts. One relative suggested stopping and checking the connection, or waiting until the smell cleared. Denise dismissed the suggestion and attributed the issue to trapped air in the line. Several nearby residents were outside at the time and had clear views into Denise's backyard. They later reported seeing her lean over the grill for an extended period, while repeatedly adjusting the control knobs with the lid closed. When Denise lifted the grill lid and leaned forward again, gas that had collected inside ignited all at once. The ignition produced a sudden outward flash rather than a rising flame. The burst was brief but forceful, accompanied by a sharp sound that drew immediate attention from surrounding yards. The flame struck Denise across the face, neck, and forearms. Her hair caught fire briefly as she recoiled backward, colliding with a patio chair before losing her balance and falling onto the concrete. She remained exposed to heat for several seconds before the flames subsided. People nearby reacted almost immediately. Water was sprayed toward her clothing from a garden hose while others moved toward the grill. The propane tank was shut off within moments, stopping the gas flow and ending the fire. The fire did not spread beyond the grill area. Denise remained on the patio and did not stand back up. Visible burn injuries were present on her upper body, and no attempts were made to move her before help arrived. Denise was transported from the scene for medical treatment, but died days later from complications caused by extensive burn injuries and smoke inhalation. The official cause of death was listed as complications of thermal burns with associated inhalation injury. The death was ruled accidental. In the weeks that followed, grills on the block went unused. Several residents replaced old hoses and tanks or moved their grills farther from their homes. The patio where the incident occurred remained empty for the rest of the summer, with the grill covered and untouched. It was May 28, 2016, in a big box store parking lot in Mesa, Arizona, during extreme heat under an active advisory. One of the parked cars belonged to Kelsey Hart, 29 years old. She worked part-time as a salon assistant and had brought her 2-year-old son, Owen, with her while running errands. People who knew Kelsey described her as confrontational during disputes and quick to escalate arguments, particularly in public settings where she felt wronged. Kelsey parked her car facing direct sunlight. Owen was secured in a rear-facing car seat in the back. The engine was off, and the windows were mostly closed. Later statements indicated she believed she would be inside only briefly. Inside the store, Kelsey became involved in an argument at the customer service counter over a return. Staff declined to process the refund without a receipt. The exchange escalated. Kelsey raised her voice, demanded a supervisor, and refused to step aside. Customers nearby distanced themselves as the dispute dragged on. Store staff later said Kelsey appeared flushed and overheated during the argument, wiping her face repeatedly and showing signs of physical agitation beyond the dispute itself. Outside, the heat built rapidly inside the vehicle. With minimal airflow, the interior temperature rose quickly. Owen cried at first, then grew quieter. Investigators later noted that this progression was consistent with worsening heat stress in a young child. Approximately 30 minutes later, a shopper walking through the parking lot noticed a child alone in a parked car. The child appeared flushed and did not respond to movement outside the window. The shopper tried the door, found it locked, and called 911. Another bystander used a tire iron to break the rear window. Owen was pulled from the car and carried into the shade. Several people poured water over his clothing and fanned him while waiting for paramedics. When emergency crews arrived, Owen was conscious but lethargic. Store staff alerted Kelsey, who ran toward the parking lot, still visibly agitated. Security records show Kelsey arrived moments after responders began treatment. Seeing the shattered rear window and broken glass, she immediately began shouting, directing her anger at bystanders and staff while demanding to know who had damaged her car. Despite paramedics working nearby on Owen, she moved closer, stepping through broken glass and continuing to yell without pause. Her voice remained raised as bystanders and a paramedic attempted to redirect her attention toward her child. She ignored them and focused on the vehicle, pacing near the rear door and striking the door frame with her hand. As she reached for the handle, her movement slowed. She placed a hand on the door frame and stopped speaking mid-outburst. Witnesses said her posture shifted, her balance faltered, and she appeared confused and unsteady, failing to respond when addressed. Seconds later, Kelsey staggered backward. She collapsed forward, striking her head against the base of a metal signpost at the edge of the parking row. The impact was severe. She fell onto the asphalt and remained motionless as people rushed to her aid. Paramedics focused on Kelsey, who was unresponsive with severe head trauma and no effective heartbeat. Advanced life support was attempted on scene without success, and she was pronounced dead in the parking lot. The medical examiner ruled the cause of death as sudden cardiac arrest, with the head injury listed as a contributing factor to her collapse. Heat stress and acute emotional agitation were identified as significant contributors. Owen survived and was treated for heat exposure before being released days later. In the aftermath, the store added clearer parking lot warnings about children left in vehicles during heat advisories and updated procedures to escalate such reports immediately. It was June 10, 2015, at a neighborhood park on the outskirts of Fresno, California. The late afternoon was clear and hot. A wide grass field stretched between walking paths and a small playground. Several groups were scattered across the park, sitting in shade or standing near open space. Elaine Porter, 46, worked as an office administrator and lived a few blocks from the park. Her daily walks followed a routine, usually alone and at the same time each afternoon. People who knew her later described her as decisive and impatient with situations she believed were out of order. When she felt something was wrong, she expected immediate correction. That afternoon, a group of teenagers was flying remote-controlled airplanes in an open field positioned well away from the playground and walking paths. One gas-powered aircraft was airborne, circling low before climbing again, while a second plane rested on the grass. The teens' attention remained fixed on the flight. As Elaine walked along the paved path, the airborne plane passed nearby, still several yards away and above head level. She stopped, turned toward the field, and began shouting at the teens to leave the area. Rather than continuing along the path, she stepped off the pavement and walked across the grass toward them. When she reached the group, Elaine grabbed the grounded aircraft by its wing and threw it aside. The plane slid across the grass, its frame cracking on impact. Several nearby parkgoers shouted for her to stop and move back, but she ignored them. With the second aircraft still in the air, Elaine turned toward it and raised her arms, stepping forward into its flight path. The operator reacted immediately, attempting to pull the plane away. However, the aircraft was already in a low maneuver with limited altitude. Witnesses later described the plane dipping briefly before surging forward under power. The aircraft struck Elaine at close range. Its spinning propeller cut into her upper chest and neck area before the plane broke apart on impact. She collapsed backward onto the grass as fragments scattered several feet away. The engine stalled and the propeller stopped within seconds. Witnesses reported that Elaine was unable to speak and was bleeding heavily from her upper body. Emergency services were called immediately. Paramedics arrived within minutes, but Elaine was unresponsive. Emergency treatment was initiated on scene, but her condition did not improve. She was transported to a nearby hospital, where she was later pronounced dead. The medical examiner determined the cause of death was catastrophic soft tissue injury and blood loss resulting from contact with the aircraft's propeller. The death was ruled accidental. In the months that followed, the city restricted remote-controlled aircraft use to designated zones and times, added warning signage near pedestrian areas, and redirected hobbyists to approved flying fields. No charges were filed, and the park reopened under updated safety policies. It was December 25, 2013, inside a single-story home in suburban Columbus, Ohio. The afternoon was warm, the windows were closed to keep the air conditioning in, and the kitchen was crowded with family for a Christmas gathering. Tara Whitman was 33 years old, and spending a December afternoon at a family home during a Christmas gathering. She ran a small event rental business and enjoyed sharing party tricks and simple demonstrations online. Relatives later described her as assertive and hands-on, someone who often took control of situations and reacted poorly when corrected, especially around younger family members. That afternoon, several teenage nephews were preparing a cola and Mentos demonstration they'd seen online. A 2-liter bottle sat upright in the kitchen sink, positioned so the eruption would shoot upward and drain safely. A phone rested on the counter to record the experiment, but it wasn't central to the plan. Adults warned the boys not to touch or drink from the bottle once the reaction began, and to step back immediately. As they explained the steps, Tara interrupted, dismissing the precautions. She laughed at the need to step away, said they were overthinking it, and insisted she'd done similar tricks before, telling them to relax. As one of the boys reached for the Mentos, Tara abruptly lifted the bottle out of the sink. Someone told her to put it back and warned her not to drink from it. She snapped that she wasn't a child and didn't need instructions. She repositioned herself closer to the counter, leaned over the sink, and told everyone to stop interfering. At her direction, one of the nephews dropped the Mentos into the bottle she was holding. The reaction began instantly. Carbon dioxide is released violently, forcing foam and soda upward at high speed. Instead of setting the bottle down or stepping away, Tara raised it toward her mouth, appearing to attempt to drink from it despite the ongoing reaction. The pressurized liquid surged faster than expected, flooding her mouth and throat with a volume far beyond what could be swallowed or expelled safely. She immediately began coughing and choking as the bottle slipped from her grip and struck the sink. Soda and foam spilled across the counter and onto the kitchen floor. Tara bent forward, gagging and struggling to breathe. Panic set in as she tried to regain her footing while still disoriented from the sudden aspiration. As she attempted to step backward from the sink, her foot slid on the wet tile. She lost balance and fell hard, striking the back of her head and upper neck against the edge of the countertop before collapsing onto the floor. Family members later said she was still coughing and confused immediately after the fall, but quickly became unresponsive. Emergency services were called immediately. The family attempted to keep her airway clear while waiting for responders. When paramedics arrived, Tara was unresponsive on the kitchen floor, with signs of severe head and cervical trauma. Despite airway management and oxygen support, she did not regain consciousness and was pronounced dead at the scene. The medical examiner ruled the cause of death as blunt force head trauma from the fall. Acute aspiration of carbonated liquid and a panic-induced loss of balance were listed as contributing factors. Investigators found no evidence of poisoning, equipment failure, or allergic reaction, confirming the cola and candy reaction behaved as expected. No charges were filed. It was April 21, 2018, at a city zoo in Omaha, Nebraska. The afternoon was mild with clear skies and steady foot traffic. Families moved along walkways between exhibits, pausing at railings separating visitors from enclosures. Near one exhibit, a viewing area was partially closed with barriers and warning signs. Janelle Mercer, 31, worked as a retail supervisor and was visiting the zoo with a small group of acquaintances that afternoon. She worked as a retail supervisor and had come to the zoo with a small group of acquaintances as part of a casual weekend outing. Several visitors later recalled noticing her near a partially closed viewing area, where she became engaged in a tense exchange with staff. People familiar with Janelle described her as someone who resisted correction and frequently challenged posted rules, often dismissing safety notices as unnecessary or overcautious. The viewing area overlooked an animal exhibit, separated from the public walkway by a dry concrete moat. Beyond the main railing was a narrow, sloped maintenance ledge scattered with loose gravel and never intended for public use. A secondary barrier had been installed to keep visitors out of this restricted zone. Zoo staff said the area was closed earlier due to crowding and limited visibility. When Janelle reached the barrier, she stopped and argued that the closure was unnecessary, claiming the area looked safe. An employee explained the restriction and directed her to continue along the walkway. Janelle refused to move. Witnesses reported that she raised her voice, dismissed the warnings as exaggerated, and insisted there was no danger beyond the barrier, as nearby visitors stopped to watch. Instead of complying, Janelle climbed over it. Surveillance later confirmed that she lifted herself over the rail, one leg at a time, stepping into the restricted area. She moved onto the narrow maintenance ledge beyond the barrier. The surface was uneven, with small stones scattered across the concrete, and there were no handholds or guardrails. The space was not designed to support foot traffic. Standing on the ledge, Janelle turned back toward the public area. As she shifted her stance, her heel slid against the loose gravel. Her foot lost traction almost immediately. She reached backward toward the railing, but her hand did not connect with anything solid. Her center of gravity tipped beyond recovery. With no barrier to stop her fall, she went backward into the moat below. Several witnesses reported hearing a sharp impact as her head struck the concrete base. Her body did not move afterward. Zoo staff reached the edge of the moat within seconds, and one employee descended using a nearby access ladder. Janelle showed no signs of consciousness or voluntary movement. Emergency services were called immediately. Paramedics arrived shortly after and found her unresponsive at the bottom of the enclosure. Resuscitation efforts failed, and she was pronounced dead at the scene. The medical examiner determined the cause of death was severe blunt force head trauma with a high cervical spine fracture, consistent with a backward fall from the maintenance ledge onto concrete. Death was determined to be instantaneous. Investigators reviewed staff statements and visitor accounts, which showed Janelle arguing with staff, climbing over a clearly marked barrier, stepping onto a restricted ledge, and falling. The barrier was intact and functioning as designed, with no equipment failure or structural defect identified. Inspectors confirmed the exhibit met safety standards and that access restrictions were in place due to crowd conditions. After the incident, the zoo added taller barriers, expanded warning signage, and increased staff presence near similar enclosures during peak hours. It was November 3, 2015, inside a busy family restaurant in St. Louis, Missouri, during a crowded dinner rush. Dawn Pritchard was 44 years old and worked as a dental office receptionist. On the evening of the incident, she stopped at a casual sit-down restaurant after finishing her shift, intending to eat before heading home. She arrived alone and was seated near the front of the dining room, close to the host stand. Employees later told investigators that Dawn was familiar to the restaurant and had been involved in prior disputes. She was known for escalating minor complaints and raising her voice until staff intervened. That evening, she called over a server and said her chicken entree was raw. Kitchen records later showed the dish reached standard internal temperature, and no other guests reported issues with the same batch. Dawn rejected the explanation. She stood from her table and moved toward the host stand, speaking loudly enough to draw attention from nearby diners. She demanded a refund and accused the kitchen of serving unsafe food. A manager offered to replace the meal or remove it from the bill, but Dawn refused both options. She threatened to report the restaurant for health violations and said she would document the kitchen herself. Despite being told to remain in the dining area, Dawn stepped past the host stand toward the swinging doors marked "Employees Only." Two staff members attempted to block her entry, but she pressed forward, forcing the doors inward as she continued shouting. The kitchen was in the middle of peak service. Near the fry station, the tile floor had a thin layer of grease mixed with water, an expected condition during active cooking hours. One cook was stationed at an open fryer filled with hot oil, operating at standard frying temperature as steam rose from the surface. Witnesses said Dawn entered the kitchen with her phone raised, still yelling accusations toward staff. Her attention remained fixed ahead. She did not slow down or adjust her footing as she stepped fully onto the slick tile. Her right shoe slid sideways almost immediately. The slip was abrupt. Dawn's center of gravity shifted forward, and she attempted to regain balance but had no traction. She fell toward the fryer well, her hip and torso striking the metal edge first. The impact pitched her upper body forward. Her forearm and part of her upper body plunged directly into the hot oil inside the fryer well. The cook closest to the fryer reacted instantly, grabbing Dawn's clothing and pulling her backward, while another employee activated the emergency shutoff. Dawn screamed as she was dragged clear of the fryer and collapsed near the doorway onto the tile floor. She remained largely motionless, breathing shallowly and irregularly. Severe oil burns were visible along her arm and side. Staff members kept her still and contacted emergency services while clearing the immediate area and shutting down nearby equipment to prevent further injury. Paramedics arrived within minutes. They found Dawn suffering from extensive thermal burns across a large portion of her body. Her blood pressure was dangerously low, indicating shock. She was briefly conscious during initial assessment but lost responsiveness shortly thereafter. She was transported under emergency conditions to a nearby hospital. Despite emergency treatment, Dawn's condition declined quickly, and she died later that night. The medical examiner ruled the cause of death as burn shock caused by extensive hot oil immersion burns, leading to rapid fluid loss, systemic inflammatory response, and cardiac failure. Investigators concluded she had forced her way into a restricted kitchen area and slipped on an active service floor. The fryer was operating normally, and no health or safety violations were found. Afterward, the restaurant added non-slip mats, installed an additional barrier at the kitchen entrance, and retrained staff on dispute escalation. No criminal or civil action followed, and the restaurant reopened the next day. Thank you for watching. Click here for more videos.